All right, welcome to the video. Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 4. So I was in the Word earlier, and if you're a Christian, you know the Word is very life-giving, very stirring, and it feeds your spirit. And a couple chapters spoke out to me, so I'm going to read some verses out of those chapters, and I encourage you to read all the Bible, but today we're going to encourage you to read Mark chapters 1 through 5. And Jesus obviously is awesome and does some phenomenal things, but it always challenges and encourages your faith and pushes back against kind of the washing of the world with the washing of the word when you read the Bible. So that's what happened to me today. I'm sure it's happened to you, but I'm going to start in Mark chapter 4, and we're going to start in verse 3. And Jesus tells a parable. It says, "Listen, a farmer went out to sow seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants so that they did not bear grain. Still, other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100. And then later on, Jesus is talking to his disciples. This is later on in chapter 4, and he kind of explains the parable. And so we're going to jump down to verse 14, where he explains the parable. And this really convicted me, encouraged me, and challenged me. And it said, "The farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of this world, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 60, some 30, and some 100-fold." But that word really stood out to me, especially in today's climate. And I'm going to keep it brief and not be preachy. I'm just going to talk about what it spoke to me. And I feel like a lot of us fall into the second category. We hear the word, we hear it with joy, whether it's in church, a little quick Devo on our phone, or some inspirational post, and we're like, yeah. And then as soon as we go out later that day and later in the week, we get roughed up a little bit, whether that be by Satan, by our own flesh, just disappointments, life be lifing, and we lose the word. But what this has said to me is just to hold on to the word of God and trust and believe and produce fruit with that. And I think when you believe, I know when we believe in the word of God and we take it to heart and we act on the word of God, it doesn't fail, and it produces fruit in our lives, and we produce fruit for the Lord, and we make converts and disciples for Jesus Christ. And it just, especially in this climate, encourages me. It's crazy how the word is so pinpoint accurate even in this day and time. I'll jump back in it. It says, "Others, like seed sown in rocky places, hear the word at once, receive it with joy, but since they have no root, they only last a short time." And I just spoke about that. Like, that's super, we've all done that. That's easy. That's an easy thing to picture. But getting a little deeper, he says, "Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful." I mean, that pretty much covers everything. That's a picture of life in general, just being distracted by lust, being distracted by politics on either side, this or that, what's going on in the world, excuse me. And what I'll just say briefly for me is that I've, one, increased my intake of the word and lessened my intake of the world and its things. And then two, immediately go back to the word of God when I hear something to the contrary. Like, I was watching a thing recently on the news about stuff going on in Ukraine, and somebody was making a comment like, World War III is going to happen. And I started to think, well, what if it happens? No, God's better than that. And then I had to stop myself. I was like, I don't care what happens. My hope is in Jesus, and that the word says trials and tribulations will come, but be of good cheer. Jesus has overcome the world. And even if I step foot outside tomorrow, the next 10 minutes, and I pass away, I will spend eternity with the Lord. So I already have the victory. I'm fighting for a place of victory. And when you kind of zoom out and think of eternity, and you think of the suffering that we have shortly on this earth, even if you live 120 years, what is that? Think about the size of the universe, that we know it's unfathomable, and a grain of sand. And that's kind of where I kind of picture these things. Now, it doesn't feel like that. A grain of sand in your eye is very painful. But I would encourage you to dive into the Word and look into scriptures and get a study Bible where you can look up topics. You don't want to be super topical. You just want to be in the Word, and it'll produce the fruit in your heart. But if you have a Bible that points out scriptures that talk about God being faithful, His love, His forgiveness, and all those things, and the Spirit will naturally lead you to those things, like you will have a much, much better, more fruitful life as a Christian. All right, and for some reason, I feel led to include 2 other stories in this post about the Word and about faith. And these really stand out to me. They always stand out to me. And I think they're very plain in the Bible, but they're easily missed. And so like I was saying in the earlier part of the video, I would highly encourage you to read Mark chapters 1 through 5. Just such powerful and potent things. And so we're going to jump in here in Mark chapter 5 and verse 22. And it says, "Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and he saw Jesus. He fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, 'My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she can be healed and alive.'" I'm going to pause right here. So in Jesus' ministry, he comes out the gate healing people and saying things with authority. You can tell he was a powerful, wise person, even if they didn't know he was the Messiah. And so many people are coming to him, and he's healing people, and he's saying, "Don't tell." People are telling. So crowds are following him across waterways and different towns and stuff. So we'll jump back into verse 24. It says, "So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd, touched his cloak, because she thought, 'If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed.' Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized power had gone out from him. He turned around and asked, 'Who touched my clothes?' 'You see the people crowding against you,' his disciples answered. Yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?' But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" That just hits me so much. And I, again, would encourage you to get into this word. And this is such a rich story that we kind of glaze over it. First of all, this woman had this disease for 12 years. How many of us are faithful and believe in God for something we've been suffering for in 12 years? That's the immediate question. And then it says she had spent all her money and gotten worse. And that reminds me of a friend of mine with cancer, and she's had it for 6 years now. And she spent so much money, and it's really strained her financially, and the cancer has grown to like 2 other areas. And I was just driving, thinking about her. This is just a practical thing that I'm telling you. She's a really good friend, and a couple times I'm like, man, she's gonna die, and my faith is kind of waned for her. But then I read the story, and I was reminded that, man, God is faithful even though he's not on our time frame. And just when you read this, just let that soak. I would pause at this verse. I mean, I kind of picture myself being here when he says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering," and think, what would my response be? Quite honestly, some of us would probably argue with Jesus even after being healed and be like, "How could you call me daughter when I'm broke and spent all my money?" And just still have residual frustration. that God didn't do it in our timing. So that's just crazy. So that's one story that just blows the doors off of faith. And it shows that, without faith, it's impossible to please God. And the word talks about that, when you come to God and you ask, if you believe, those things will be done for you. So anyway, we're going to jump back in, and it says, while Jesus was speaking, and I love this text because it shows things like it happens. I don't know how long it was, but it shows another setback right after that. And it says, while Jesus was speaking, some came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead. And they said, why bother the teacher anymore? How many times have you heard that? Why trust God anymore? Why go to God anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, so powerful. Do not be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, John, the brother of James. When they had come to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. At this they were completely astonished. And this is such a rich story. And one of the things I love about this story is that Jesus models the behavior we should have when someone comes up to us and says someone's dead or something's dead and we've gone to God. We should say to ourselves, no, just believe, or say to others in doubt, no, just believe. So that's one. And then two is, look how Jesus moves when he's going to the house. He only takes a handful of his disciples and he moves out unnecessary people who are laughing and doubting. And notice how he doesn't start arguing with him. He's very focused, even though he's delayed in the sense of man, he's still preparing the scene for the miracle to happen. And I think in our own lives, sometimes we'll press God for something and it doesn't happen, and we stop preparing for it. Well, I'm not going to get the house, so I might as well just go on this trip and do that and do this. And it's not that you don't stop living your life, but don't get detoured and derailed is what I see in Jesus doing. And also some people, these were all Jewish people who were in the current faith at the time. And they were doubting, and they misread the Messiah, the God of the universe in flesh. And so we got to check ourselves with that. How many times have we done that or done that to the lives of others? Dude, are you still doing this? Are you still doing that? So it's such a beautiful story. And Jesus stops. I mean, the lady was healed before, a couple verses before. That lady was healed. So Jesus could have just said, I know she's healed. Great. She got her miracle and kept walking. He stops and takes the time to have a personal interaction with her even after she got what she quote unquote needed. And he's seemingly taking his time like he did with Lazarus, and he gets there. But you have to remember who's coming. You know what I'm saying? So with man, we got to rush. We got to get to him because death is it. But with Jesus, we just need to believe. It's not always going to happen like we want it to happen, but God is going to be faithful and he will do it in his time. And we need to prepare a place for that. So thank you for watching this video. If nothing else, this really spoke to me. I'm stirring up my faith continuously, or additionally, after I read these verses today. So I hope you got something out of it, and I will see you in the next video.